Peter, one of the great things about your work on this saga is that it gives a possible explanation about how this got so wildly out of control. But could it really all come down to a cultural misunderstanding?
I mean, I laid out my case. It, it's the reason I took the angle of trying to study this dispute through Justin's faith is that the more I looked into it and the more research I did, the more I realized that it did help explain a fair amount of things and could have ultimately led at this particular moment in time when cultural sensitivities, especially in Hollywood, are sort of at an all-time high. It definitely at least struck me as worthy of presenting an argument to our readers.
Is it just the ultimate clash of personalities?
Yeah, and you got to remember that the dynamics on a Hollywood set are extremely complicated. You're talking about dozens, if not hundreds, of cast and crew members. A single day of filming can cost millions and millions of dollars, so the stakes are extremely high. We are coming on the tail end of COVID. Before that, there was the Me Too movement and the Black Lives Matter movement, which very much shifted what was deemed to be appropriate behavior on a Hollywood movie set. And things used to be that things could get kind of loose. You could sort of, you could engage in certain types of behavior or certain types of language. And in certain cases, it was okay. And I think that we've entered into an era when behavior and language is much more policed and much more strict. And I felt like, but from my reporting, from what I was hearing, that there was some strange stuff that was outside the norms happening on the set of that film. And it just, some of it really kind of aligned with some of the rules and tenets of the Baha'i faith that I think may ultimately, at least partially, explain how this thing grew into this massive legal dispute.
When you look at Hollywood, often strange behaviour is just par for the course, right? But what was so strange about the behaviour on that set that you noticed?
There was a lot of prayer. There was a lot of hugging. Justin has a proclivity towards talking about how he wanted to consult with God on certain creative decisions. One of the weirdest parts of this whole thing was that Blake, she claimed that Justin told her that he had been communicating with her dead father, who had passed away several years ago, and it was just so strange. And I think in this day and age, when Hollywood sets have become much more strict about what you can say and do and get away with, certain people found his behavior and some of the things that he was saying and some of the producers were saying highly objectionable. As I opened my story with, there was perhaps the most peculiar rumor that swept the set was that Colleen Hoover, the author of the book that the movie was based upon, who was a world-famous author, practically all of her books are becoming bestsellers now. There was this persistent rumor that Colleen was a member of the Baha'i faith. And that rumor lasted for months and months. And it couldn't be further from the truth that Colleen was a member of the Baha'i faith. And I never got to the bottom, nor did sources that I spoke with who are close to Colleen, got to the bottom of who actually started that rumor. But it speaks to the fact that this religion played a major role, not only in the company that was financing the film and producing the film, but also in the way that Justin wanted the creative process to unfold on set.
That aside, there are two narratives here, aren't there? On one, you've got Justin Baldoni, the director, accused of inappropriate behaviour and then conducting a smear campaign to protect himself. On the other, an A-lister who bullied her way into taking over control of a film set. Is it either or of those things, or is it possibly both?
I think it could possibly be both. It's hard to say. On the latter of those two, I've done some reporting on that, and my colleagues have looked into what happened at the end of the film. Because you got to remember, one of the things that complicated this production was that it was cut in half. by the strike, by the writers and the actors strike, which lasted for 6 months. So for the first half, things went okay. And then there was this pretty elongated break. And when the actors and the writers resolved their disputes and they were ready to go back to work, well, that's when the real friction started to come to the surface. Because Blake, all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, I take that back, because she had been lodging some of these complaints for months, but she applied a new condition on her coming back to work and market the film, and that was that Justin was going to have to, well, Justin and Jamie Heath, the producer, were going to have to change their behavior. And that led to an infamous meeting in January where she and a team of executives and lawyers all sat down with Jamie and Justin, and they signed this document saying that they were going to change their behaviors on set, which ultimately was a very central piece of Blake's case against Jamie, because it was sort of the smoking gun, or at least her team alleges, that proves that things were totally out of control on that set.
You mentioned the meeting there where it all came to the surface, and so that in your mind is the crisis point on set. The people you've spoken to who worked on the film, were they shocked at that point that it had gotten that far, or were they aware that something was bubbling under the surface?
Making matters even more complicated is that Wayfarer was the company that Justin Baldoni and Jamie Heath are sort of co-run together. And Wayfarer is owned and financed by a gentleman named Mr. Sarowitz, who's also a member of the Baha'i faith. And Wayfarer was the producer and was basically overseeing the production. Sony was the distributor of the film. But as far as the way the set was policed and the way that complaints were supposed to be lodged, the complaints were supposed to go back to Wayfarer. And I spoke with a number of people who felt that that was just fundamentally a broken way to have a checks and balances on a set when you have, if the complaints are being directed towards people who are part of the Wayfarer family, well, who's going to feel comfortable filing a complaint with an HR department that is ultimately overseen by the same people you're complaining about? So there was some dysfunction as far as how the checks and the balances should have gone on set. And some people have criticized Sony for not stepping in earlier. Some people have said that, when it became clear to them and those executives that Blake was feeling uncomfortable, that there was this tension between her and Justin, that for the good of the film, they should have patrolled and inserted themselves more directly in the film. But I think they chose not to, and probably for a whole host of reasons.
Well, let's take it back to wherever this started. It's hard to keep track at this point because so much has happened. What were the first hints on the production of that film that these two weren't seeing eye to eye?
It all kind of burst out into the open publicly in the lead up to the release of the film. It became obvious. There was already hints and rumors circulating that there was this tension between the two, but it was sort of unproven. It was actually the premiere when the whole entire press corps of Hollywood could see that there was this schism between Justin and Blake and some of the other prominent actors in the film, to the point where we later learned that they were basically, he was sort of banished from any of the photo ops with Blake and other members of the cast. They basically said that you are prohibited from actually showing up and being seen altogether. So that was basically when it became clear to the world, and by the world I mean the Hollywood press corps, myself included, that something was definitely awry. When things actually started on set, if you go through the court documents and if you read through Blake's original complaint, well, it came pretty early. And I go back to this rumor circulating that Colleen Hoover was part of a religion that she wasn't of. That was happening in the development process and when the production immediately started. So, look, if you were looking for things that were kind of screwy happening on that film, you could probably say pretty darn early in the production.
There's that infamous photo now of Justin in a basement with his close supporters. I mean, have you ever seen anything quite like that? A director of a film banished to the underground?
No, no. I mean, it's hard to think of a similar situation in recent memory. You know, the director is the general on the film. And this was really supposed to be a watershed moment for Justin in his directing career. For him, ultimately, you know, to be relegated to like some sort of drab room. It's hard not to chuckle, but it was crazy.
It says it all about how far it's come, hasn't it? But look, you touched on it there in terms of right at the beginning, the actual production and the film set. Based on your investigations and who you've spoken to and what you've read, what was the first conflict between Justin and Blake?
I think there was the ones that came early had to do, and there weren't like timestamps or dates that I'm aware of, but it surrounded the way they would some of the language that he would use about his past and his the way he would sometimes allegedly talk about women. There was an episode when I believe it was before the strike, when her lawsuit alleges that he walked in on her trailer when she was breastfeeding. That was a major threshold moment for her. I believe there was an issue surrounding quite early about COVID protocols on set, and apparently they were quite lax compared to what they used to be. And I know that that was another major point of contention that Blake and her legal team have brought up. So I think the earliest had to do with the way that, you know, the language that he would use. And then I think, as I reported, a lot of it was like the hugging and sort of the general sort of woo-woo language and sort of praying that was happening, which just may not rise to the level of being, you know, breaching any sort of rules or norms, but it strikes many, I think, who aren't part of that faith as, you know, kind of unprofessional.
And sort of flies in the face of the Me Too movement, isn't it, to make a woman feel that uncomfortable on set?
It sure does, and I think that, you know, it's hard to exaggerate how the impact that the Me Too movement had on this industry. It changed everything, and rightfully so. There was just terrible behavior that had been going on here for way too long, and a lot of these awful actors were exposed, and it's been a very good thing for the industry. But it has the lingering aspects of it are that you cannot say certain things in the wrong company. And I, you know, there's been a lot of debate about, you know, what the allegations in the suit are bad against Justin, if in fact they are true. There's been, you know, a lot of discussion around town, but where do they rise to the level in the spectrum of offensive that we saw during the Me Too movement? And, you know, hard to say. You know, that's sort of up for viewers. I would suggest that they go and look, but I don't. My general feeling was that they were, if true, bad, but they're not at the Harvey Weinstein level or the Kevin Spacey level. They just aren't.
One of the more bizarre aspects of this saga is, to borrow Blake's words herself, Blake and her dragons. Can you explain to me and give me a bit of an insight into what happened when he went to her house and met with herself, I believe, Ryan Reynolds? Can you paint a bit of a picture for me there about what went down in that early part of the production?
I got the sense in talking to people that had been in touch with Justin throughout the production that he really felt this was a big opportunity, and being able to cast like a movie star like Blake Lively for that role is a big deal, and it bumped the profile of this movie up dramatically. And you can just think about the phase or space that Justin was in, that all of a sudden he is now on a peer level with not only Blake Lively, who has been, you know, a well-known commodity in the entertainment industry for a very long time, but now he's, socializing and texting and talking with Ryan Reynolds, who is a massive movie star and one of the most, highly bankable actors out there, one of the more beloved figures in the industry, like obviously a brilliant entrepreneur in addition to being, a very, very successful actor. So I got the sense in people that Justin was just sort of like, wow, I'm there. I'm now with and communicating and socializing with two of the Hollywood royalty. And so you could probably get the sense that he felt like this was a very amazing opportunity and that he had sort of arrived. But I think that tensions then sort of started ratcheting up on set, and I think it had to do with the way that he and Blake were interacting, and she obviously felt that maybe his directing style wasn't quite what she needed, and that obviously some of his behavior and some of the way he interacted with her in some of these scenes clearly weren't to her liking.
Blake has come out really strongly and said there will be people on set who'll back up her allegations. I mean, in your reporting and who you've spoken to, who are they siding with on set? Are they moving towards the director or are they backing up Blake?
Well, yeah, there has been a lot of rumors and speculation about, and even innuendo in the legal documents that Blake has filed in both her original complaint and then in her amended complaint, strongly suggesting that other actors had felt similar to how she had felt, that they had felt deeply uncomfortable about the behavior on the set by Justin and his partner, Jamie Heath. But for some reason, these other actors didn't want their names published in the legal filings. And it's my understanding that there was a campaign, a push by some of Blake's team to convince some of these other actors to join her suit, to go public with their concerns, and to basically kind of back up the things that Blake is alleging in her suit. To date, none of them have actually gone public, but there's been strong speculation about some of these other actors, who they are, and we will see. There's going to be a lot more twists and turns in this legal case, so there's going to be opportunities for them to potentially go public if in fact they feel comfortable or strong enough that they need to do that. But there is this sort of weird tension that Blake's camp has been saying and referencing the fact that there are others out there that are ready to come forward, but so far they haven't.
One of the peculiar things also when you read through the exchanges between Justin and Blake is it remains quite civil for quite some time. When did they go away from remaining civil and continuing filming to effectively being at war with each other?
Well, I think after the strike, there was this infamous January 4th meeting when Blake laid down her ultimatum, which was that for her to come back and finish the film and market the film, which is a key element to this whole thing, because marketing is a huge part of all of these, the rollout of any of these properties. It was clear that she was ready to go to the mat, and she wanted things done her way if she was going to help. So I think that was the signal. It probably came a little bit before that, but that's when it broke out, certainly within the inner circles of the production team and who was in charge of the movie, that things between them had reached like rock bottom.
Based on who you've spoken to, when Blake came back and effectively took the lead and took control of the process on set, do you understand that that was met with perhaps support and cheers from some of the cast, or was a lot of the production team sitting back going, hang on a minute, this A-lister is completely hijacking this project?
I think there was a schism because there was a lot of people who were part of the Wayfarer community, who again were the producer and the financier of this film. Blake happened to be the biggest movie star by far on this movie, so she exerts an immense amount of control and power because of that fact alone. So I don't know. I think that yes, there was. I think that just broadly there was just a lot of tension on the set, and they tried to bring in some new producers. Sony, sensing that things were getting very, really bad, they brought in some new producers that they thought could help fix things, could help police things, could help sort of make things right. But no, I don't know. I didn't get the sense that all of a sudden everyone was falling into one camp versus the other. I just think clearly a number of the cast were, as we saw in some of the statements that came out later in support of Blake Lively after she filed her first suit, clearly there was some support for her. But because Wayfarer and Justin and Jamie had such a huge part as the directors and the producers and the financiers of this, it wasn't as clear as just everyone starting to sort of fall into line behind one or the other.
Whose film did everyone end up seeing in theaters, Blake's or Justin's?
That's an excellent question. I have not been able to see the two cuts that existed, and so I can't answer that question exactly. The general thought in town was that Blake's cut was the one that ended up making its way into theaters, but I've also heard other versions of events where it may not have been that different from the one that Justin had cut. So I don't know the answer. There's probably a handful of people at Sony and at Wayfarer and maybe a couple editors that could answer that. I just don't know.
Yeah, the fact that people don't really know probably says it all, doesn't it, about how far this all went?
Yeah, but I mean, I do know that when you get to the final stages of a film in this editing process, it does become, it can get academic about whose cut is which, and a lot of people start weighing in, and there's this push to try and make this final version. So it can often get messy, not specific to this one, but yes, it does say something that there was this ongoing sort of lingering mystery about which one was actually the one that the public saw.
Now, you started touching on it earlier. Once the premiere happened and people started recognizing that something wasn't right there publicly, a big part of the conflict in the allegations was this alleged smear campaign to try to protect either side. Based on who you've spoken to on set and around, I mean, what are your thoughts on whether or not a smear campaign was used by either side?
Part of the reason why I think this lawsuit has captured such widespread interest, I mean, well beyond the confines of the entertainment industry, this has just really struck a chord. And I think part of the reason that's happened is that because there's so much documentation, communications that have now entered the court records and now the public record. The hundreds, if not thousands, of texts between Justin and his team of publicists, and the emails, and that kind of pulled this veil back on this world that people find very mysterious. The entertainment world is very mysterious, and how publicists work is very mysterious. And in Hollywood, publicists can exert and have historically exerted a huge amount of power. So I think if you were to look at those texts, and if you look at some of the language surrounding it, again, we're not getting all of it, but it's hard. It would be hard to say that there wasn't some sort of a campaign to try and, at the very least, control the narrative. And I'm being sort of generous in choosing those words. So I don't know how somebody reads all of Blake Lively's original complaint and doesn't get the sense that at least some sort of action was taken to try and counter what they felt was her potential push against Justin and his reputation. Who was worse than the other? Man, hard to say. There's been obviously. Justin's team has allegedly hired a guy out of Texas, who's now been embroiled in some of the legal stuff, and he's sort of an expert in the field of, creating problems for people reputationally on various social media platforms. That would suggest that at least something probably maybe have happened, but it's hard to tell how much of the bad response, and there was a lot of negative outpouring on a lot of these huge social media platforms towards Blake, and it was vicious and cruel and mean-spirited. It's hard to tell how much of that was organic versus allegedly manufactured.
Regardless of whether it did happen or not, it all paints a pretty disgusting picture of what can happen in show business. Were you shocked by all this, or is that just how Hollywood operates?
I wasn't shocked. What you're shocked by is that you had this sort of digital trail of publicists ultimately, openly talking about it. And that's the thing that I think was the most shocking part. I grew up in Southern California. I've covered the entertainment and media world and politics for a very long time. So I wasn't. I'm aware that publicists and PR crisis consultants, they engage in this sort of behavior, and they have been for a very, very long time. What I found shocking was that you had a trail that was just so explicit and laying out what seemed to be two publicists plotting this strategy, and then ultimately just having that exposed to the world, which you don't get to see very often.
It's really hard to imagine it getting much worse from here, but there's a long time until that court case. Where could it go from here?
It's pretty bad. I was talking to people, we discussed this a lot internally inside the newsroom, is that could this thing actually make it to a trial? It seems right now that both sides are not blinking, and they're both going at this full bore. And that's crazy because it's coming at a huge reputational harm to, I think, both of them. As far as what can happen next, there's going to be several more twists and turns legal, I'm sure of it. There seems to be one or two, every other week. I think once you get closer to the date when people are going to be subpoenaed to provide phone records and cell phone records, and the discovery phase starts in, that's when people really start sweating and get very uncomfortable at the prospect that your private communications are now going to be entering the public record. And clearly much of this dispute is playing out in the press. So my general feeling is I'd be surprised if it ultimately makes it to a court case, but based upon the way that both sides and their lawyers are speaking and acting right now, I don't know which one will flinch first.
Surely you just cut your losses at this point.
Both Justin and Blake see them fighting on this point of principle. So I really feel that both sides are looking at themselves as the aggrieved individuals that's fighting, the bigger party, and that they're not going to back down. And that is an argument that this very well could keep going on all the way to a court case.
What you just described, that sounds like an absolute recipe for disaster.
It is, because these people have amazing careers and amazing reputations, and it's very hard to achieve that level of success in this industry. And obviously Blake and her husband Ryan Reynolds are almost as high up as you can go. They are Hollywood royalty. But Justin was on the cusp, and he is now taking a huge reputational blow. He's lost projects. I think a lot of people feel that they'd be surprised if he's able to ever achieve the sort of stature that he had having directed this film. And it's what's particularly strange and crazy to me is that this all happened on an extremely successful movie. I mean, this was really a breakout hit and should have been seen as a massive win for all parties involved. And the fact that a film that as successful as this one was has ultimately led to this sort of destructive unfortunate, nasty legal dispute is just, you don't see it very often, and frankly, it's sad. It's sad.
And you got your own taste of that, didn't you? It was a fascinating piece you wrote, and then there's an attached artwork with it. Blake didn't like that very much, did she?
She didn't. She took a particular offense at some elements of the story, some that I was in control of, some I wasn't in control of. But yeah, she was upset. But I spoke with them. We listened to them. We always do. I approached that story. I'm not taking a side. I never would. I think I ultimately wrote it and reported it in a very balanced way. So I'm proud of the final product. But yeah, you never know. Some people are, you can't win them all.
The list of demands you mentioned when Blake came back from the writer's strike. What was on that list of demands?
The meeting was around, I think it was on January 4th, and Blake and her lawyers and her team sat down, and they had, I believe it was a list of 17 things that they wanted Justin and Jamie, his producing partner, to agree to. And it was a whole laundry list of various things. It spoke about no more speaking in certain terms about women, no more pretending that you can speak to dead people. It was about talking about their watching pornography. It was not burning certain types of incense. It was a long, broad list of things. And I know it was 17, and there's actually been a dispute because their lawyers, both sides, have contacted me. It ultimately grew to around 29 different bullet points. I know it started at 17. It grew even more than that. They get upset when they say that both sides have different versions of how they ultimately landed on the 17 and the 29-point document. But yes, it was quite broad, and it covered a whole range of stuff.
In your piece, you talk about a power vacuum being on set. How is that allowed to happen?
Well, you got to remember, Justin isn't the most experienced director. He had directed 2 feature films before, but I don't think he had ever directed anything of this high profile. And then you landed Blake Lively, an actual movie star. And so Justin, I think, was a competent director, but this was a project that was next level for him. And then you got to throw in the fact that Justin was starring in it as well. And so I don't believe he'd ever directed and starred in a feature film with this type of a budget. So I think I've been told that kind of, the word that a source told me is that he got a little over his skis on thinking that he could do all of this, perhaps this early in his directing career. But you throw in the fact that you have your lead actress, who is obviously growing increasingly upset with the way things are being handled on set. I think there were some creative decisions that were made that she didn't like, and if she is ultimately putting up resistance, that is going to trickle down to other actors and to the crew, saying, who's in control of this place? And I think once Justin lost Blake, then I think a level of chaos sort of started to simmer through the set, and that created sort of the power vacuum that I think Sony became aware of, and that's when they sort of injected themselves a little bit more to sort of make sure that they wanted to get this film over the finish line.
Did Justin's faith play a role in creating that environment as well?
I don't think it played much of a role, only insofar as that it set the stage. I had argued in my story for a growing divide between Justin and members of the cast, obviously, specifically Blake Lively. I think it did play a role, and I think that ultimately got to the stage where I don't think he totally lost control of the film, but I think when his relationship with Blake deteriorated to the point where they're having this sit down and he's having to sign documents that sort of indicate that he had been doing all sorts of things wrong, that it was clear to him that he was in trouble to try and get this thing all the way to the finish line. So there was, there's been some, we've reported on it in the past, in our pages about how the movie ultimately got finished. Blake did take a bigger role to help in the editing process. I think they brought in some more producers. I think there's additional editors, I think, were brought in to help get it there. And if you read the court documents, it's clear that at a certain point later in the film's production, Justin felt like, I think what he shared was, I'm just going to wave the white flag here. But they had a hit film, so that, again, I go back to it. They stuck the landing. It's just they're breaking their legs after that.
It's a mess. It's an absolute mess.
Yeah.